Misinformation quickly spreads on social media.
When the algorithm tracks everything that you do.
I think we should also mention the elephant in the room here, the far right Zionist.
Whether we talk about communism or fascism, radical Islam or far-right Zionism, the foundation is essentially the same.
We need to be breaking the cycle that brings them up. It's Ghada.
It's Amina, and welcome to Jet Lag Politics, which is a podcast where two immigrant women with an 8-hour time difference between them discuss everything because, as we've established last time, everything is political.
Indeed, we are a bi-monthly podcast, although we're making exceptions right now due to the popular demand from our listeners to do more and also longer episodes. How do you feel about that, Amina?
I am humbled, I am grateful, and I hope we can continue to count on our listeners' support.
And you seem particularly happy today. Anything exciting happened this week?
Yes, there are so many medals for Africa this week. And I don't just feel happy, Ghada. I also feel a sense of vindication. And it's my new favorite feeling of 2024. I hope I get to feel this many more times.
I can't agree more, particularly for North African Muslim women who have been facing all kinds of discrimination and suffered the brand of this Olympics edition double standards. Yeah.
What this tells us is that right now, women who look like you and me, Ghada, are keeping a lot of people awake at night. So if we take the current particular context of the UK, how does it feel being a scary woman right now?
It feels scary. Actually, I am the one who is being scared at the moment, if I'm honest. But I like we are bringing this up through the Olympics because what is happening in the UK right now is, in fact, inscribed in the bigger trend of what is happening all around the world. And it is the rise of the far right, Amina.
Is it on the rise, or did the extremists just get more vocal? Tacitus, who is one of the world's first historians, if not the first, rightfully said, "Give me a border and a common threat, and I will create a people for you." But let's begin with the violent England riots.
It all started with a rather heartbreaking and shocking event. Three little girls were stabbed to death at a Taylor Swift dance class. 8 more kids and 2 adults were injured. And a 17 years old was quickly identified and arrested by the police, but his identity was kept anonymous. And rightly so, I mean, he's a minor. And the incident was not treated as terror related. However, misinformation quickly spread on social media, claiming that the stabbing was a terrorist attack suppressed by the government and that the offender is a Muslim, asylum seeker, or a migrant who recently came to the UK in a small boat. They even went to the length of attributing a fake Muslim name to him, and one misleading post reached 15 million accounts across social media platforms.
And although this was immediately fact checked, it did nothing to turn the story around, rendering the truth completely meaningless, which tells us that this is not anodyne. Kind of the misgendering of Iman Khalif at the Olympics, despite every single fact about her being made up and easy to dismantle. But I digress. Sorry, let's go back to the UK story.
But actually related, it's all related. These unfounded claims in the UK, they gained massive traction with viral infamous figures like the misogynist influencer Andrew Tate and also the far-right activist Tommy Robinson amplifying them, which led to riots erupting in Southport initially, which is a little town in the south of England, where a mosque was attacked. And then the violence spread quickly to many towns and cities across England, and there were clashes with the police. And I mean, despite the police efforts actually to correct the misinformation, and to be honest, now I'm not sure if it is misinformation or disinformation. I think we can rightly describe it as disinformation because it is more intentional. And despite the police efforts to actually correct that by lifting the anonymity of the suspect's identity for the sake of public interest, the disinformation continued to fuel the unrest. And it led to widespread violence, property damage, several racist attacks, The rioters attempted to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers. Can you imagine? They vandalized libraries, they damaged shops and businesses belonging to members of the Muslim community.
As if these people haven't been through enough already, as if they didn't have more in common with them than they do with those who give the order to attack them. All right. Vox populi, vox dei is Elon Musk's favorite proverb right now. It means the voice of the people is the voice of God. By the way, the guy is slowly morphing into a neo-Nazi before our eyes, citing freedom of speech. And we seem to be totally fine with that. But anyway, this phrase, particular to the Web 2 era, aka social media, user generated and interactive, it means that the will of the mass prevails over everything, even good judgment. And we've seen how easy it is to bend the will of the masses through, as you said, misinformation or disinformation, echo chambers, polarization, sensationalization. It also means that people's worlds rarely collide nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, the role of social media in enabling misinformation and disinformation is undeniable. When Elon Musk himself, he has been like directly involved in the event. For instance, the de facto leader of the EDL, which is an English far right group, it is the English Defense League. Tommy Robinson, he was fueling the violence in England through his ex account while sunbathing in Cyprus. And I mean, that wouldn't be possible if Elon Musk didn't restore his account along with many others who were actually previously banned for breaking the website rules around hate speech. And Elon Musk himself commented the civil war is inevitable in reference to the events in the UK, which caused an outrage amongst the politicians and the journalists here. So, yes, social media is definitely eroding the power of the mainstream media and also the power of the nation state. And not only by providing a platform for people like Andrew Tate or Tommy Robinson, but also by the way the algorithms are set up to lock us within our filter bubbles.
You know, Lara, this year I managed to hack my own filter bubble, and now it's only stand up comedy and clumsy animals, and I couldn't be happier.
Oh my god!
Let me tell you.
I didn't think of this before. You should show me how.
But what is a filter bubble? Well, in essence, it is what happens when the algorithm tracks everything that you do, what you like, what you share, what you linger on, also what you dislike, as well as wherever your mouse hovers. And that's used to feed you the content that will make you spend as much time as possible on social media platforms. And by the way, that mainly includes content that causes you distress. So progressively, this morphs a reality that only confirms your thoughts, your interests, and beliefs. You're not challenged anymore. You have very little exposure to variety in your life, and ultimately, you are isolated.
Indeed, and being isolated makes you an easy target, and it has ramifications beyond getting rid of the ads that you don't like. Yeah.
Do you remember the shock of the Cambridge Analytica data scandal?
You know what? I mean, that's actually a great example of filter bubble. Yeah.
All right. So, as a little reminder, the Cambridge Analytical scandal involved the illicit harvesting of data from millions of Facebook users without their consent, of course, to influence voter behavior in political campaigns, notably including the 2016 US presidential election. So, someone like Donald Trump, with his MAGA slogan and low-level discourse that was thought to be random, amateur, and frankly embarrassing. But what the scandal showed us was the extent of his campaign sophistication, which was based on tailoring his message to each person's deeply seated fears. It was also the first time we really started to worry about micro influencing and psychological profiling in political campaigns.
So, Amina, to be clear here, we are no longer in the days when social media provides an equal platform for all the user generated content. no matter how unfounded or misleading it might be, or who is behind whatever he's sharing and whatever their agenda is. Now, social media platforms are intentionally locking us into our filter bubbles. So we only receive the type of content that echoes with our preconceived beliefs and reinforces our biases. And it also shields us from any counter narrative.
Every major platform that we know has regional departments all around the world called public policy. And I think that says it all. Take a look at Facebook, for example. When I worked in political communication, that was over a decade ago, I got to see the additional services that are not available to you and me, but are tailored for government use, which we can say is normal. These platforms have power and have to play a responsible role after all. But what happens when people are dealing with a dictator? Wouldn't that make Facebook a powerful tool in their hands? But is social media the only culprit here? In other words, if social media didn't exist, would what happened in the UK still happen?
Actually, it's a very good question because we shouldn't let the mainstream media and the political discourse off the hook here. Yes, social media is definitely an enabler, but we shouldn't underestimate the normalization of the racist and far right views by the mainstream media. As an example, Boris Johnson, when he compared Muslim women to letterboxes, he did it through mainstream media. He did it through a Telegraph column. uh, so yeah, and also speaking a little bit about the mainstream media, we shouldn't forget who owns these media. In the UK and the USA, for instance, we have Sky News, Fox News, the Times, the Wall Street Journal newspapers. They're all owned by the same person, by Robert Murdoch, and he's known to be a right-wing media mogul. And I think it's also now almost the same or very similar, to say the least, with the situation in France with also another billionaire, Vincent Bolloré, who bought established titles such as Le Journal du Dimanche or also e-Télé, and he transformed them into right-wing platforms through emptying their newsrooms.
That's because whoever gets to control the narrative wins. That's why language is important. We all know the phrase that history is told by the victors. And it starts with the reshaping of the most obvious truths. Just take a look at the way that mainstream media covers the Ukrainian refugee crisis versus the Sudanese one.
Yeah, indeed, actually, language and framing are important. And let's spend some time here addressing the political discourse that has been going on for years, if not for decades, with the migration being its centerpiece. For instance, in the UK, for example, the former Home Officer or Home Secretary, I think, Suella Braverman, she called the pro-Gaza protests hate marches, and she accused the Metropolitan Police of not doing enough to stop them. And then when these rioters or protesters, they call themselves, experience the police display of power, it is easy for them to actually believe that there is a two-tier policing going on. And then you have Nigel Farage, who is also another politician. He's now a member of parliament. He's a party leader. We should expect that he would be like a bit more responsible. But still, he is sowing doubts about the nature of the incident. He's flirting with the far right. He's saying that we were not being told the truth, or maybe this happened, maybe didn't happen. And he is also actually explicitly speaking about two-tier policing. So the question here is, how can we blame those people for repeating the same things that these political leaders who have should have certain credibility and a certain platform have been saying?
It's the snake biting its tail, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, let me just explain. I've mentioned two-tier policing twice now, and I just want to say that this term has been used to suggest that the police have been more heavy-handed with people on the right. of the political spectrum than those who are on the left.
Define left. And this is a question for the likes of Nigel Farage because their fight isn't happening where the right's fight is. So that could explain it. Also, the fights on the right side are much more and objectively more violent. The very issue here is that these don't meet much anymore.
I mean, I think that Amina, people like Nigel, obviously he should answer the question, but when he's talking about the far and the right, he's not talking in the political sense of the term because he actually mentioned the BLM or the Black Lives Matter. And also, Tommy Robinson cited the example of the pro Gaza protests, which make me think that maybe they are actually not referring to the left. They are referring to us. They're referring to the ethnic minorities, to Black people, to refugees, to these vulnerable groups.
It actually feels like people around the world are getting less sheepish about their anti immigrant sentiment. And in some instances, like in England, they have graduated from hate speech to violent altercations. Of course, guys like Tommy and Tate don't sully their hands. They get misguided people to do that while they based in their opulent villas. And they don't need a reason for that. The justification of violence is slowly turning into an obsolete step, as we've seen how the violence is directed towards communities that have nothing to do with the death of the little girls.
Amina, let me just clarify here. Are we saying that reasoning with them is also a waste of time? What is the alternative for the rule of law? It is not supposed to be the foundation of a fair and just society?
That is a great question for those willing to sit at the table, which is not their case. But as you say, Lada, what else could be done?
I think that we as societies, we did in fact account for such scenarios, and we are pretty clear and strict on that. So it is unacceptable, and it leads to prosecution to the full extent of the law. And this is actually what happened in the UK. Those who were involved in the riots, they got immediately prosecuted. Their names and pictures and sentences were shared as a form of deterrence, maybe. Um, but what is truly at stake here? Can punishment genuinely uh, prevent people from harboring certain thoughts? Does it really solve the problem, or does it just discourage them from acting on these thoughts, like stop writing? But are we really addressing the underlying causes of the problem? Are we really solving the root cause of the problem, or are we merely alleviating its symptoms for the time being?
I think it's twofold. First, as you said, the far right now has legal representation, be that in parliament, media, or even heads of state, which emboldens them. It gives them legitimacy. Second, what drives them actually feeds off of the feeling of being persecuted. So all that would do is further solidify their ranks, making the next riots perhaps even more violent. We see someone like Donald Trump talking about the events of January 6th when right wing extremists stormed the Capitol, and he says that the way they were being treated was unfair. Here, he joins Farage in his notion of two-tier policing. Again, none of this language is anodyne, it's not random.
It's interesting you brought up Trump because I think that his election in 2016 have marked a turning point in the normalization of hateful rhetoric. Uh, Also, I think it's a time that made us realize the existence of multiple realities or multiple realities in Sino actually due to social media algorithms.
You know, when Trump was elected, I was at the end of my first semester of my diplomacy degree. We were reviewing what was going to be on the exam, and that included things like the power of diplomacy and how it's an art form and types of diplomacy and conventions and symmetry and all that. And we were pretty disillusioned and had to ask our professor about the point of our whole degree if Trump was leading the most powerful country in the world and cared not for at all about any of this. And he was really stumped, just as much as we were. And at the time, we were really swimming in uncharted territory.
I think we are back to swimming in those uncharted territories again now as Trump is running for election. And we'll be talking about that in details in the next episode. But now, actually, we are used to his way of talking, his communication style. But we have to remember that it was pretty shocking at the time, Amina, to see him provide a platform for the likes of David Duke, a neo-Nazi, anti-Semite, and white supremacist. He's also, I think, the leader of KKK. They falsely called it freedom of speech, which is really dangerous. But also, there is another problem here. Instead of completely shutting such ideas down, many fall into the trap of arguing against it, which paradoxically contributes to normalizing it.
Yes, and I think, just by saying it was shocking, the way that Trump talked was shocking, just implies that it's not shocking anymore, and so it is normalized. I think we overlook the role of reasonable people, either on the left or more central players in feeding the radical right. For example, right now, I see that the Democrats just came up with a campaign against Trump, and it's just based on calling him weird, which is exactly what he lives for. Now, everyone that's ever been called weird can identify with him.
Being called weird. Have you been called weird?
Me too, pretty much once a day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can definitely relate to Trump in that sense. It's definitely ineffective, I think. But back to our conversation, I mean, are we saying here that there is a particular type of people that gets recruited by the far right or into the far right? And it's easy actually to observe the far right in action here in the UK or in the US or even in Europe. But people may wonder if this is endemic to majority white regions.
I think a good starting point is to define the far right and what characterizes it. First, when we say far right, we're defining it on a political spectrum, and that's specific to each country or region. But what this starts by telling us is that it is an extreme form of nationalism, which in turn comes hand in hand with xenophobia and finally ties pretty perfectly with racism.
And I want to clarify something here. Although it tries to use mechanism of democracy to advance, far right as an ideology doesn't really believe in conversation or coexistence with those they deem different. So that's also adds a layer of authoritarianism.
Indeed. So if we take a look around the world, we start seeing it everywhere. In India, for example, with Modi's Hindu nationalism getting more and more alarming and out of hand with new policies every day that discriminate against Muslims. What is currently happening in Sudan also qualifies as a disastrous result of far right movements that target ethnic and religious minorities. If we take a look at Southern America, we can go to Peru, for example. You have the Fuerza Popular, which is anti left and anti indigenous rights.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think we should also mention the elephant in the room here, the far right Zionism.
Far right Zionism, indeed.
The blueprint seems to be the same, and it's important to highlight it's not always white versus other races, although we see colorism play a role here in every example. And but again, this is like a byproduct of colonialism. And actually, maybe a deeper look into each of these examples and many others will eventually lead us to colonialism, which confirms that none of this is new.
Such an important point you are making here, Rada. I will spare our listeners the history lesson, but far right ideologies actually used to be the norm when there was a more rudimentary approach to security, resources, and legacy. You may think of the Crusaders or the Spanish Inquisition, but also take it further back to Babylon, the Assyrian Empire, or even Sparta.
But between now and then, Amina, there is a clear pattern for the proliferation of these movements. And it's always correlated with when we have a lot of these new poor or people who tend to compare their now to a better then. And by the way, it doesn't have to truly be that way. A perception, even a wrong one, is enough.
Exactly. The notion of new poor is one that's very well explained in a little book called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, which explains how extremist movements are birthed. A lot of 20th century heads of state love that book, by the way, and it is rightfully a powerful one. What this tells us is that whenever we get a recession that impacts the livelihood of the working class or blue collars, they will most likely turn on the people they're told by politicians are the problem. Unfortunately, the trendy, cheap shot target everywhere right now is immigrants.
Absolutely. I mean, I can actually cite few examples here, and but usually immigrants and other minority groups are often singled out, largely due to stereotypes, assumptions, and preconceived notions that make them vulnerable targets. It's easy to fabricate stories about them, feeding into these biases. The Jews and the pogroms in Russia, again, the Jews in in Germany, in Nazi Germany. It's really easy to fabricate stories about these ethnic minorities or migrants in this case that feeds into people's pre-existing stereotypes about these groups. Yet, even a basic investigation would reveal that attacking these communities does nothing to address the underlying issues. So why then is there such a persistent adherence to this misguided hatred?
It becomes fair to ask whether people who adhere to such hateful ideologies are inherently bad people. How do they go from neutral to that? To go back to your earlier question, Rada, what are the prerequisites for becoming a far right activist?
Yeah, so let's look into the recipe of making making a far right activist. Actually, jokes aside, if we refrain from passing judgment, we can see that what often actually radicalizes these individuals is a profound desire for change. This can stem from a loss of locus of control, a complete distrust in the prevailing culture or status quo, and this is really important, a zero sum belief system, the notion that for them to succeed or win, others must necessarily fail or lose.
You know, I would add to that a severe lack of imagination. And I'm not saying this to mock them. It is, in fact, a serious affliction that makes them vulnerable. It's the inability to see a positive or alternative future for themselves as individuals. And that leads to barely charismatic individuals exploiting that simply by painting a picture for them. That's essentially hope. And if you can manufacture it, it makes you very powerful.
Actually, I mean, I have to say, I really, really love this particular ingredient you mentioned, the severe lack of imagination. And yes, I want to add something about those who come in power vacuums and identify these communities that are largely ignored by institutions that are supposed to protect and provide for them. And they actually come, appear in these power vacuums and use these people.
So, what we're essentially saying is that what's disguised as hope is, in fact, the weaponization of despair. And that happens across the spectrum from left to right. In fact, studies show over and over that radicalized mass movements are broadly interchangeable, even when their goals and values dramatically differ. So, whether we talk about communism or fascism, radical Islam or far right Zionism, the foundation is essentially the same. It's just a different hats. How did Saul become Paul? How did the man who completely opposed Christianity become the most fervent apostle? We can argue that he remained the same man.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can definitely argue that. And I think instead of fighting ideologies, we maybe because this is really pointless. We need to be breaking the cycle that brings them up. So we've established it now, Amina, that people get radicalized essentially through fear of what they don't know and control, but also through their numbers, because another prerequisite or ingredient, if you will, is the effect of the group belonging to something bigger than themselves. The question here, or actually, I have many questions. The first question here is, how do we reel them back into the discussion table? And how do we do that? Should we dismantle the mechanism by which they self organize? Do we cut off the head of the snake, or do we gently offer to paint a different picture?
So, Lana, there are two schools of thought here. And I have to say, for those wondering why I might be pulling all of these ideas from, I have, in fact, worked in this particular field for 7 years. So, the first one is confrontational. Fascism is not an attitude, but a function of power. And we know that power only respects power. So the approach is to occupy the space they want to occupy. That's if we say that these people are irredeemable, we can't coexist, their worldview is at war with our worldview. The second approach is, as you say, about painting a different picture. It's providing an alternative solution to their problem and requires the starting point to be one where we acknowledge their pain points. The first is effective on the short term, the second in the long term, but either way, the effort needs to be continuous.
Really interesting, Amina. And on that note, I want to bring us back to the events on the ground here in the UK, as I actually provide a concrete example of what you are stating. I'm going to give two examples that represent the two different school of thoughts you mentioned. The first one, it can be described as confrontational, as you mentioned, or like reclaiming the public space, if you will. And we've seen actually significant numbers of counter protesters gathered in many cities to show solidarities with the minority groups and oppose the far right writers. And to be honest, it was also funny and interesting to see that many writers actually didn't show up just because they knew they were outnumbered. But also, I can add to this example the example of the French election, where the left parties created a coalition to prevent the far right from ruling. But then again, in the UK or in France, the outcome, yeah, it looks positive, stopping the riots or blocking the far right from uh, leading or blocking them politically. But we are still operating within the same dynamics of confrontation and them versus us. Um,
And you know, Lada, here, I think it's worth pointing out the virtue signaling, which is just noise flagging the real fight. Again, social media creates these armchair warriors who tweet the most compelling viral digs to the opposite side, just to get likes, and more dangerously, creating reactionary responses that can even be more violent than the initial one. That's our little PSA from Jet Lag Politics. Please do this stuff for the right reasons, guys. The self righteousness is selfish and distracting. Um,
yeah. Yeah, please don't do it just to be self-righteous or like to for virtue signaling. The second example, I mean, I wanted to talk about is Muslim men. It's a story. It's a lovely story that has been featured in the Guardian of this Muslim man who decided to approach things differently. So he organized a community event where him and a group of Muslims cooked food in the mosque, where they actually expected the writers to come and they were really waiting for them. When they arrived, he personally went out and he started talking to people. He exchanged conversations and then he offered them food. Uh, Bit by bit, people started actually accepting food from the Muslim community. They shook hands. And boom, before you know it, the riot was dissolved peacefully. But I actually have a question here, and it's about the practicality or the feasibility of this approach at a bigger scale, and whether it is actually possible to solve such an ideological dilemma. by simply talking to people's humanity?
Short answer is yes. And that's only because we've seen many examples of that throughout history. The bigger truths are not very original. When you talk to people's humanity, you talk on the basis of what's underneath the surface, where it hurts, and you address that at the core. We actually require very little from each other when you think about it. We all want to belong, and we want our lives to have meaning.
I can't agree more, Amina. On that note, thanks for yet another enjoyable conversation. I hope our listeners would enjoy it as much as we did.
Absolutely. But remember, folks, that none of this matters if we don't fix climate change.
Absolutely, absolutely, Amina. Yeah.
So we hope you found this episode insightful. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback.
Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you are watching us on YouTube. And join us next time as we continue to explore the complex world of jet lag politics.
Thanks for listening to Jetlag Politics in all the platforms where you usually listen to podcasts. Our next episode is in a couple of weeks, or is it? Let us know what you'd like to listen to us discuss, and until then, please take care.
Thanks, Amina. Bye.
Bye.